Hi, welcome back to another episode of Coldstream Rod Shop. I'm Derek Fraser. For those of you new to the channel, what we're working on here, we've actually got three 32 Roadster projects here on site. There's two right here right now. There's what we call the Camera Lady's Roadster, Brenda's Roadster here. The body for it is underneath the tarp over there. And then also we have one that we call the International Roadster, and for the time being it's sitting over in our other garage. At some point in the near future we'll be bringing it back over here to start working on that chassis, but for now the two active projects are these two here. So in this week's episode, the priority is basically for me to get the engine and transmission out of this chassis, because we're kind of nearing the end of the fabrication stuff on the chassis. All the mock-ups where everything has to go. The one last thing I have to do is weld a couple brackets on for the flex lines on the front here, but I've done that many times. It's not going to take much time at all. But what I want to do is I'm going to get this Y-block engine out along with this AOD transmission. We have another Y-block that's rebuilt over in the corner that's ultimately going to go into this. So this particular Y-block engine we're not going to use. We're going to use a few parts off of it, like the rear sump oil pan and this 4-barrel intake. So they're going to be swapped off onto the one we have over in the corner at some future point. But what I want to do is get the AOD transmission out and over and get rebuilt. I don't have the knowledge, and we don't actually rebuild transmissions here. So I'm going to send that over to somebody that knows what they're doing. The other thing that's planned for this week is the Flathead Ford. It's actually a Mercury, a 255 Mercury engine, along with a T5 transmission, is supposed to come back this week. So what we're going to be doing with Brenda's Roadster is actually start reassembling some of the stuff to get prepared to put the body back on the chassis. There's a lot of stuff we have to do to pick up, including fuel lines and drive shaft, engine, transmission, clutch hookup, and make sure it's working. So we're going to get it prepped to get the body on. I'm not sure that we'll actually get the body on this week, but that's the plan for Brenda's Roadster. So follow along. We're working on 32 Roadsters. Carrying on with the goal of trying to get the engine and transmission out so that I can take the transmission to go get rebuilt. I've got the flex line brackets right there. They're clamped in place. I'll weld them after I take the engine out, but I kind of like where those are at, so that's good. Both sides are set up. We got plenty of room for the flex lines to turn with a full radius. And then I've taken all the exhaust out. So ultimately the stainless steel exhaust, I want to get them either ceramic coated with a white paint or a white very high temperature paint onto it. The rest of the exhaust we're going to clean up, and once the weather's good, I'll paint that with a very high temperature paint. But for now, the pieces are going to be set aside as we strip things. There's the other side all stripped out right now. A couple more things to take off of here. Now, what I want to do also in this episode, if I can get it, you can see the bar there is flipped forward. I want to get a stainless steel piece that I can then weld in between the two headlight posts. So before I take that off, I'd like to get that done this week as well before I start taking the headlights off. So I don't know if there's anything else I had to do, but anyways, we're getting close. We're going to get the engine and transmission out of here shortly and get the transmission off to the rebuild. And there it is, the Y-block and the AOD are out of the Camera Lady's chassis. I didn't do a time-lapse video or anything like that. I've covered that before. It's relatively straightforward, pulling an engine and a transmission out of a chassis. I think a lot of viewers have done that themselves. So right now, what's happened, we've got the shifter, the low-car shifter mechanism off. I've got the original shifter shaft from the AOD, which was removed prior to me getting the transmission. And then there's this low-car shifter shaft that comes with the kit that has to be installed when the transmission is rebuilt. From the little research I've done, that shaft has to be installed when the pan is off and kind of upside down. So I'm going to leave that to the experts to do. But I'm going to take all the parts with me, including the shifter. I don't think they need this. All the other places, when I had transmissions rebuilt before, they didn't need this, but we'll take it along with us just in case. And then over on the floor, there's the transmission. I've taken all the unnecessary brackets off. The transmission adapter is staying, the new starter is staying. I have an AOD torque converter that looked in good condition. I covered the snout on it just in case I didn't want it to get rusty or anything like that. Put some transmission fluid around it, cover it in plastic. When I bought this transmission, just to kind of, because a lot of times that's what's going to kill it, if the outside of that snout is all rusted up. So we'll get them to test the torque converter and see what kind of shape it's in. If it's good, we'll use it. If not, we'll buy another one. We're not going for a high performance build on this. So I'm going to take the advice of the guy that's doing it so there's a guy not far from here. It's Rick Rude's Transmissions. I think it's in Middleton in Nova Scotia. Does a lot of hot rod stuff, so he's quite familiar with what to do with some of these projects and that. He actually will come and help you set up the TV cable on this when we get the car ready to go. Now the Y block, I've got it out. I still have to get it over on the stand because ultimately I want to get it on the stand so that I can remove the rear sump oil pan, which we're going to need for the other Y block engine over there, because most of the Y blocks in the passenger vehicles have a front sump. The pickup versions have a rear sump, so we're going to need that rear sump pan and the rear sump pickup to take it off. So we'll get that off, we'll get it cleaned, and we'll get it ready to go over on the other engine. And then of course, like I said, this 4-barrel intake here, I guess it's quite a desirable cast iron one. We can go with an aluminum one, but it's I guess ECZ one, which is the large Holley spread bore intake. So anyways, we're going to get onto that. We'll get it on the stand, and then hopefully tomorrow or the next day, we'll get that transmission out to the transmission shop. It's snowing like a bugger here right now, so we're not going anywhere for probably a day. Unfortunately, nothing is ever simple, I guess, when you're dealing with old stuff. What I thought was going to be a really simple task of putting the Y block motor on the engine stand turned into a 45-minute modification process. I had several of these engine stands before. I had 4 or 5 of them, sold a few off, and I thought I kept the best ones. The best ones actually don't adjust to fit the Y block transmission bolt pattern. So what I had to do was actually re-drill or drill an extra set of holes down here. This bracket would normally go in this position or in the slots. The only way to fit the Y block transmission bolt pattern was to actually re-drill 5/8 holes here in order to accommodate it. So anyways, we got it on the engine stand. I have the transmission there up on the hoist ready to load it on the truck, and we're going to get that out of here shortly. At the moment in the shop, we are waiting for the flathead and the transmission to come in. So we're going to leave the engine stand over there and the Y block here for the time being. Not sure if that engine and the transmission is coming today or tomorrow. Got to check in. The weather is kind of really cold here at the moment, so we're not sure about what the travel plans are. So the other thing is that after I took the engine out of the camera lady's car, since we've been working on this chassis for quite some time, basically we work on it when we're not working on the other projects in the shop, I realized that the tie rod has to be changed there. It is too short. I did order another long length, so what I'm going to do probably today is make sure that that is cut to the right length. So you can see the tie rod there's too much thread there. It actually needs to be longer. So going to fix that up. And then also the rod that was going from the unisteer over to the tie rod there, I don't have one. So we're going to make one of those up today. I'm going to go over the chassis here just in case we miss some other stuff. Check for some fittings and welds and stuff. I know that when I put it together, I did a good job. I'm going to go over it again. The other thing, I want to thank everybody that reached out to us for the headlight bars. So what the plan was in the last episode was to actually weld a bar to those two posts. Now, what's happened is a couple of folks have reached out to us and said, well, why don't you just get an original bar and cut it and then weld the ends to it. So it looks like that is now the plan. So at the moment, we're going to wait until I get that bar, and we're going to accomplish what we wanted to do, but with an original bar that we're going to cut up. So anyway, thanks to everybody that called and sent me messages on that. It was really helpful, and got to do the right thing. So in order to determine the right length of the tie rod, what I wanted to do was basically take the front wheels off and do an alignment on the front end for toe in, because I want to have the tie rod the exact length. So right now, even though that tie rod there is too short, there's enough adjustment onto it so that I could adjust the toe in to 1/8 of an inch, and that way I can then measure what length of tie rod I need. So what I wanted to do was, when it's perfectly adjusted, I'd like to have 3 threads showing here on the end of the tie rod. That way it gives me a little bit of room to adjust in that. Same thing with the pitman arm. Now with the pitman arm here, or the arm that goes from the spindle to the unisteer, what I wanted to do is, I've got my 3 threads over here that are exposed. I have 1 5/8 of thread here. So what I did my adjuster here to 1 5/8, so it's the same, because a lot of times when I put these in, especially when you're between the hairpins and stuff, sometimes what you have to do is install the tie rod ends and then screw the tube in. So you kind of want to have an equal length of thread on either end. So I've got both of those measurements. I need 42 1/4 for the tie rod and 15 3/4 for the pitman arm. So right now I've got this piece here I bought from Welder Series for a tie rod. It's threaded on both ends already, so we're good, but it's 42 1/2 inches. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put that on the metal chop saw. I'm going to take 1/8 of an inch off either end. There should be enough threads for me to put both of the tie rods in, but worst comes to worst, I've got the taps, I can chase it in. Now, the pitman arm, or the arm that goes to the unisteer, is a lot longer. It is threaded on both ends. This was an arm that went onto a Vega steering box. I'm not sure where it came from, but it's the right tensile strength steel, DOM tubing, the thick stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to cut it to 15 3/4. Then I'm going to have to go over to my friend's place and then open it up in order to run the taps in, because the material's thicker. I've done that before on the channel. The drill that you need to use to open it up is 41, there it is, 41/64. So I think it's like a 1/64 of an inch bigger than 5/8. So I'll cut that, I'll go over there, we'll open it up, and then I'll tap the end to get the pitman arm. So I decided to go out and buy myself a new metal cutting chop saw. I've used the abrasive wheels over the years, and in my work history, company I used to work for, when I used to work on the shop floor, we used to have carbide cutting metal chop saws back in the day. They were industrial quality ones, but I guess relatively recently, some of this stuff has been available on the consumer market for the average guy and the average garage. So decided to go get one, and that's the box for it over there on the floor. It's a 14-inch 66 tooth metal cutting carbide saw. It certainly does the trick. If you buy one of these, the one thing from my work history, do not try and chomp on it. You've got to come down slow and feed it slow, and it cuts really well. Otherwise you start knocking teeth off. The thing cuts really, really well. There is the I don't know if you can focus on that. I mean, it cut it off nice and square and clean. The only thing is, if you notice here, like instead of putting all kinds of dust up in the air with an abrasive wheel, you've got all these little metal chips all over the place. A lot of it winds up in the tray, but when you're done, if you don't have a dedicated area, you got to get the vacuum out and suck stuff up because there's little metal chips everywhere. So anyways, nice new tool for the shop. Probably going to use it a lot more. Don't have to worry about using a little mini grinder with the cutoff wheels and them breaking and stuff like this. Hopefully we can make some more accurate cuts in the future. Now we've got the tie rod and the pitman arm, or I guess steering arm, all tidied up now. I went over to Gadet's Hot Rod Shop and I used their lathe and opened up the end of the tube and retapped the 11/16 ball joint thread on the tube. Now we've got them both installed for a final fit. I'm happy with them now. We've got, like I said, the goal is to try and get like a couple, 2 to 3 threads at the final adjustment stage on both of them, and we've got that on both sides. That way we've got the maximum number of threads engaged into the tube. You can probably get away with less, but I mean, if you have a choice, that's kind of where I want to go. Right now, I've got the front end tied in between an 1/8 and a 1/16 inch of toe end, so that's typically where you're going to keep an I-beam or a solid axle front end set up at. So happy with all of that. And then, like I said, I think I already said it already, I've got the little brackets welded to the frame for the flex lines. A couple more things we want to do before I completely strip the frame and get to the sandblasting and painting stage, which is probably somewhere out in the near future. I've got a proportioning valve here. Now, normally with the proportioning valves, a lot of times I just drill a hole in the side of the frame and tap it. I think what I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to make a small little bracket with a couple studs onto it so that it just, I have the opportunity right now. It's not painted or anything. When we did Brenda's Roadster, over there you can see the proportioning valves. The sides of the frame are thick enough that you can drill and tap them, but I guess if you get your tap off a little bit, you probably would have to put an insert or something in there. So what I'm going to do on the Camera Ladies Roadster is that I'm going to basically put the proportioning valve approximately through that hole there. I'll make a little bracket and weld it to the inside of the frame. So there's one of the last details on the Camera Ladies chassis that I think I have to weld on before we start stripping it and getting it ready for paint. Essentially, it's just a bracket to hold the proportioning valve on. What you want it to do is you want it to be able to sit out away from the frame so you can turn the knob. So all I did, I just took a couple 1/4 inch 28 bolts, welded them to a piece of 1/4 inch plate, and then welded the plate to the side of the frame. Like I said, you can also just drill and tap a hole in the side of the boxing plate, put a couple washers behind it, and then really do the same thing. But I just kind of wanted to do something a little bit different with this, but it does the trick. Said we're not going to run the brake lines before we paint it and stuff. We'll do that afterwards. I mean, everything's in place right now as far as brackets and clearances go, so we're good. Hopefully now tomorrow morning the Flathead and the transmission is due to come back for Brenda's Roadster, so hopefully in a couple seconds you'll see us getting onto that. So the Flathead and the T5 are back from the gentleman that owns Brenda's Roadster. He has a clutch into it, the oil pan pickup, and I think he had to put an oil pump into it too. His plan had been to put two barrel Stromberg carburetors on it, but the intake manifold wasn't done in time. So for the time being, he's going to use a Edelbrock 4-barrel intake manifold and a 390 CFM Holley carburetor for it, which is kind of cool. So there's a few little things I've got to do to it, a couple plugs and sending units and all that kind of fun stuff. We'll get some of that sorted out, but in the short term, what I'm going to do is get the engine and transmission back in the chassis here, and then there's a little bit of an explosion of miscellaneous parts that came with it too. We are going to work on getting the gas tank hooked up and sending units and pickups and all that kind of fun stuff. So we're back onto Brenda's Roadster chassis. Well, there's the Flathead sitting back into Brenda's chassis. A few little touch-up things we had to take care of. There's a little cover that goes around the flywheel. We had to put that in and get some new nuts and bolts for it. The oil pressure setting unit, I wanted to put that in before I put the body onto it because there's not a lot of access to put that in. The other thing is that the original temperature sending unit, which normally goes right here, now this will work with an original gauge, but if you've bought aftermarket gauges, I strongly recommend that you use the temperature sending unit that came with the gauges because there's a possibility that the ohms or the resistance or whatever in the sending units won't necessarily be matched with the original to the new gauges. At least if you get the temperature sending unit that came with the gauges, it's matched to the gauges. So use the one that you have the gauges, otherwise you can be chasing gremlins later. Another thing we did was we had to block off the, this was going to be set up, I guess, at one point for a heater. So there was a passage we had to block off here on the water pump and another one up here on the head because we're not going to be using a heater on the Roadster. I started hooking the headers back up and the exhaust back up, which is not really that big of a deal. We already had the one before. And then right now I am painting the brackets up there for the slave cylinder for the clutch and then the emergency brake handle because they weren't painted before. So got a coat of paint of those before we put them back on the chassis. Going to work on the other exhaust side. By the way, the same thing for the gas sending unit. If you get a set of gauges, for example, Dolphin gauges, or you get them off eBay or whatever, they come with like a gas tank level indicator or float or whatever. Use the one that comes with the kit that's matched to the gauges because you could have a mismatch between the resistance in the fuel tank sending unit and your gauges. So if you use the one that comes with it, it should be matched with the gauges. So again, just so that you don't chase gremlins later. Anyways, we're going to carry on trying to get this, as much of it put together as possible. We're not going to be able to get the body onto it by the end of this episode because we're still waiting on a fuel pump and some fuel lines. We want to run those before we put the body on it. But we're going to put as many pieces on this as we can. Okay, so I went as far as I could this week, just kind of recapping what I just finished off before the last little film clip. I did manage to get the driver's side exhaust completely in and everything all torqued down and tightened, and it's all good. I did manage to get the e-brake and that on, get it all painted up, so that's good, but basically kind of run at a time. As far as what we did this week, essentially it was Y block out and strip the chassis on the Camerlady's Roadster and then Flathead in on Brenda's Roadster. And that's kind of what we're going to have to continue with over the next few weeks. Finish stripping off that frame in a future episode and then continue to get this chassis, all the final stuff done onto it to put the Roadster body on. Now, for those of you who didn't watch last week's video, the Roadster body's all painted, and just we'll give you a peek here and show you the nice, pretty color it is. There it is. So we're trying right now to keep all the dust off of it in this this building here. Normally, when we do assembly work, we push everything over into the other garage. But for now, what we're going to do, since there's not really any kind of fabricating and whatnot going on, what we're going to do is we're going to get everything ready on this, get the body onto it, and then hopefully then we'll move this chassis and this body over into the other building. We'll do the assembly work on it there, and then we'll carry on with some of the fabrication stuff. But anyways, that's it for this week at Coldstream Rod Shop. Please like, share, tag, and subscribe. Send me your comments, and come on back next week.